All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is good morning, good evening, good afternoon. This is a little overview of the questions for the final exam. So the direction video that I provided is generic. I've used it for other exams. So let's just clarify here some of the directions, especially the due date, right? So before we jump into the questions, I want to talk about the due date, and I just want to refresh on a couple directions here and kind of hammer them home, things that I think generally, based on what I saw in the midterm, could keep in mind as you work on the final exam. All right? So the due date is Thursday, December 16, 2021, essentially by midnight. That is hard deadline. If you do not get the exam in by that time, it is late. Unless you have arranged with me in advance and we've agreed kind of contractually to give you an extension, and that extension will have a specific date where I will expect it to be turned in to, which if it's not in by then, it will be late as well. Everything's been posted. This is going up on Friday, December the 3rd. Exam isn't due for basically 2 weeks. That's a lot of time. I suggest you use it wisely in light of all your other exams, and you really pace yourself to be able to get this done in a satisfactory or superlative way. So you've got 2 questions, just like the midterm. Each should have a minimum of 1.5 pages. Answer only should be 1.5 pages, and it should be spaced at 1.5 as well. 1.5 pages spaced at 1.5, 12 font. Regular margins, normal margins. Please don't fudge the margins, because that will be taken into consideration in terms of its length. Length is no proof of an answer. Just because it's 1.5 pages doesn't mean it's a great answer, and if it's 5 pages, that doesn't necessarily do you any good. And I really would say the limit that your answer should be is maybe if you go long, is maybe 2.5 pages at the very most. If you're writing anything more than that, it's too much, because part of your job in answering these questions is to do it in as direct manner as possible, where you stay focused on the scope, the boundaries, the parameters of these questions, and don't introduce things that are not directly relevant to them. So that's the next thing I want to mention, that you really want to stay on task as you write. You want to be able to refer back to these questions and say, do I really understand what's being asked? Have I answered what's being asked? Have I answered everything that's being asked? And so on and so forth. So then the next element is citations. So every time you answer a section of the question, you're essentially presenting a hypothesis or a thesis, a claim you're making, your opinion. Then what you need to do is support that opinion with 2 things: facts from the text and reasoning from the text, right? That means you need to rely on the text, and you need to cite the text as evidence, right? And it's really crucial that what you're citing is directly connected with what you're trying to claim. Number 1. Number 2, if you're quoting anything that is not patently obvious in its meaning, you need to explain it. Number 3, do not quote a whole paragraph's worth of quotation from the text. If you're doing that, it means you're just filling up space to get to your page limit, and it means you need to paraphrase and to boil that down into your own words. Remember, because I think I just kind of noticed in the midterm, through all my classes, I think there was a little bit of a blip here. When you paraphrase from the text and you put it in your own words, you still need to cite where in the text that comes from, because you're making claims that are explicitly derivative from the text, and you need to cite where that comes from with a page number. Remember, we've got parenthetical notations I'm asking you to use. You just put the author's name and the page number, right? With Othello, what you can do is put, you could either do a page number, or you could put act, scene, and lines, right? Either one of those would be acceptable. That format, act-scene line format, is found on your homework assignments. You can see that there. It's pretty straightforward. And it's actually, in some ways, it's more convenient than the page numbers to follow exactly where you are. But the citations are really important because, number one, it shows the evidence for your answer. And number two, it keeps you close to the text. You need to be making claims that are really centrally derived from the text. And once you make a general claim or establish your general statements in an introductory kind of sentence, then you need to get to the nuts and bolts and have specificity, the granularity. And that's going to come from being as close to the text as possible. And when you say something, that it's literally coming from a line from the text, things of that sort. Okay, last thing, there should be no other sources used than what has been provided to you. There should be no secondary sources. And even, for example, the version of Othello that I've provided you has some interpretive essays and some additional things in it beyond just the play. I don't want you to use those. This test is not a research paper. It is designed to demonstrate your comprehension, your understanding of the text in light of these questions. So I don't want to see any secondary sources. They shouldn't be in there. I don't want to see any cut and paste from the internet. So not only should these sources not be there, but of course if you don't cite things and claim them as your own, that's called plagiarism. It's essentially a version of intellectual theft, and it's strictly prohibited, and it will result in a failing grade. Right? So important things to keep in mind. So here's question 1 on the Odyssey, and here's question 2 on Othello. Right? So this question on the Odyssey looks very involved, but it's not as daunting as you might think, because there's one basic focus that I want you to address in this question, and then there's a lot of supporting detail I'm trying to provide of what, within that general thematic focus, some things I want you to address in the course of it. So first off, when you present your final format of the exam, I want you to leave in the questions, right? You can just leave this all in on page 1. You can eliminate the appendix. That's not so necessary. I'll talk about this in a second. And you provide your answer, and you leave the entire question in its entirety, in its whole form, at the beginning, right? So let me first say, these questions, this first question derives from the opening lines of the poem, and the opening lines of the poem really establish the central theme or themes of the entire text. They're a kind of microcosm, as I've said, for the entire text. And the focus of this question in relationship to the opening lines has to do with the journey. And I'm asking you to explain the nature of the journey here. So I say, the opening lines of the Odyssey are a microcosm of the plot and central themes of the epic poem. They characterize a journey of a certain kind. It is a journey both of body and of soul. So I'm giving you a very important insight. I'm directing you here in a very clear way, right? So I won't read these, but I will skip down to things that you need to focus on. So in the midterm, I took, for example, the fruit and the fire, Prometheus's fire, and the fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and I said, give me their literal and figurative meanings, right? So here, the theme is the journey. I want you to discuss the literal and figurative dimension of this journey, which maps onto this distinction between the body, the journey of the body on the one hand, and the journey of the soul. The journey of the soul is obviously the metaphorical thing, because souls don't physically go places, right? They evolve, they mature, they develop in some way, right? The figurative or inner aspect of the journey. So I want you to talk about these two things. And when you discuss this figurative meaning, I want you to make reference to Alexander Pope's essay on man, where he characterizes life as a journey, like a journey on the sea. Life is like a journey on the sea. I'm sorry there. And so this poem is found in the videos I provide. This poem is found in the PowerPoints that I've provided. It's something that we've talked about in class. And to refresh your memory, this is the key here. The first line in the appendix of this question, I've provided you with the whole poem, right? Or at least the relevant portion of the essay on man that deals with this imagery of life being like someone on a ship out on the ocean. He says, on life's vast ocean diversely we sail, reason the card, but passion the gale, right? One journey is physical through time and space. The other journey is the journey of the soul, a psychological journey of some type of self-development. Here, Pope is using the imagery of the physical journey, but it's all as a parallel and metaphor for the psychological journey. It's obvious. On life's vast ocean. Life obviously is not literally an ocean, right? But here he's equating life with the ocean or the journey as a whole, right? What is our life? It's a pathway through a space, literally and metaphorically. And what does he say here? He says, reason is the card, but passion is the gale. So what really shapes the impetus and direction of this journey is something psychological. And I'll do a little reminder here. The card is the rudder of the ship. Let me just say it here so you can be in the right direction. The ship is a metaphor for the person. And the ocean is their life in its totality. That's how he sees it. The rudder on a ship is the thing that guides the direction of the ship. And it goes back and forth like this. And it looks like a card. It's a kind of piece of wood or metal that's in simpler ships, it's just a kind of rectangular shape, right? And here's the thing. It directs the journey, but it does not propel the ship. It does not propel the ship. What propels the ship? He says, but passion is the gale. What's a gale? It's a gust of wind, right? And passion being the human emotions. It's human emotions which propel us forward in life, but ideally, at least for Pope, reason should guide the ship. Because passions, he seems to indicate, can't guide the ship. So we talked at great length with the Odyssey, this issue of curbing one's desires, that's relevant to the journey and coming home and things happening or not happening to people. And that life is portrayed by the Greeks, and particularly Homer's Odyssey, human life is portrayed as a struggle internally between reason and passion, right? So I'm asking you to address the literal or bodily or figurative psychological aspects of this journey. And here, essentially what I'm doing is providing you a little kind of outline of how to go about attacking or tackling this question. So you need to address those two sides. But the first thing I'd like you to do is start with the literal, right? What is literally being described here in this journey out on the ocean? And what does this journey consist of? It consists of a starting point. It consists of a destination. It consists of a means of getting there, right? A ship, right? And so on and so forth. And changing directions and all kinds of other things you might encounter on this journey. So once you've established those literal aspects of the journey, then you want to try to interpret them in their figurative meaning. In particular, I'd like you to focus on this issue of human nature. The journey is defined by the person making the journey. If this is really a psychological journey, right, the shape of the journey, the goal of the journey, and things of these sorts are a product of human nature in the form of human psychology, right? Odysseus is described as the man of twists and turns. We would think of the journey as having twists and turns, but that's not how it's articulated. It's the man itself. The human nature consists of twists and turns. He's described as this andra polytropos, this manly man of many sides or many dimensions. And this obviously has a decisive influence on the nature of his journey or his life, right? So I ask you to define these terms and connect them back into issues of the journey in the way in which this passage has actually done that itself by describing the man as having twists and turns rather than the journey. Although, of course, they both have twists and turns. Okay. So the next question is from Othello, and it really focuses in on Iago. It focuses in on the nature of his plot, on his own human nature, and his motives, right? And let me first say that in discussing his nature, what kind of person he is, it's hard not to also start to touch on his motives, right? So, as you try to address each part of the question, try to isolate as best you can and distinguish his nature from his motives as you go forward, or you can just rely on different aspects of things. But particularly, I'll come back to it in just a moment, when you get to his motives, he makes specific claims about what he says his motives actually are, right? And so when you get to that part, you really need to address those specific claims, and I've indicated the sections in the text where he addresses those claims, and you have to make what you're going to make of them. So first, what is Iago's full plot? What are its ends and what are its means? The means have to do with the methods he uses to achieve the plot, and the ends have to do with his goals, right? And so the three parts here really just reference moments in the text where he talks about his ends and his means, right? So when I say what is the end of his plot, what is the goal of his plot? What does he try to do? And let me be really clear here. Obviously, he wants to bring about the downfall of Othello. But that is just the culmination of a series of, you could say, subplots that build up to that downfall. And I'm asking you for the full vision of how he intends on bringing down Othello by causing, let's just say, problems with other characters as well. His means, how is he going to accomplish, or how does he accomplish bringing about the downfall of these characters? He has a specific strategy. He says what that strategy is early on, and, well, he's consistent with it, to say the least. Then, what kind of person is Iago, right? And here I'd like you to talk about what he's all about. What does he care about? How does he act? And a little bit about what motivates him in general, and then we can see what specifically might motivate him to do what he does. Here I've given you a passage that we covered in class about his depiction of a certain type of master and a certain type of servant, and he says, I am such a servant as I've just described, and talk about it in class. And this gets at the how. How is he going to bring about the master's downfall, right? Leave it at that. So then, to finish this up, he talks about his motives. And one of the fascinating things about Iago and his motives is that throughout the play, he makes claims as to why he is doing what he's doing. And I think the problem is, the more he asserts why he says he's doing what he's doing, actually the more ambiguous his true motive is, because he says a number of different things. He essentially gives a number of different reasons as to why he's doing what he's doing. I would think that any one of them would suffice. But his lack of consistency about what his claimed motive is starts to suggest some real ambiguity. Particularly, we have to remember that Iago is the character who says, I am not what I am. I am not what I am. And that includes what he says. And we have to remember that not only does he deceive and misrepresent himself to other characters, but that any word he might say is suspect. What we have here is a character who acts. He does things. He clearly, in his actions, brings about the downfall of these characters. But we have to also understand that the words he uses to describe the intentions behind those actions is less than clear. And this is made patently clear at the end of the play, in which Othello, whose mind has been boggled by Iago, even you could say seduced by Iago, he has been befriended, he thinks, by Iago, and he thinks of Iago as a true friend, a true friend. So when Othello finally discovers that this is not the truth about Iago, and of course he discovers that he's wrongfully killed his wife, he turns to Iago and says, essentially, why did you do this to me? Why did you do this? It does not make any sense. It boggles my mind. He says, demand me nothing. What you know, you know. From this time forth, I never will speak a word. So at the decisive moment where you think you might get the ultimate answer as to why, what his motive or motives are in realizing this plot, he says, what you know, you know. It's kind of tautological. Don't demand anything of me. And he won't say anything about it going forward. And what you know, you know. And the question is, based on what you've seen in the play, this is a statement not just to Othello, but it's to the audience as well, who's been watching and been kind of a co-conspirator with Iago here, at least in the sense of a passive observer of all his machinations that other characters are unaware of. And so the question is, what do we know? What have we learned about what has motivated Iago to do this? And I'm asking you a very specific question. In your judgment, in your opinion, based on supporting evidence, why do you think he has done what he has done? And I think the play is designed to generate, depending on who you are, different answers for different people, right? Different perspectives. I think, and so what I'm looking here is not the right answer, but a well-supported answer. Okay, so apart from that, any questions, please send my way, and I'll be happy to answer them as completely as I am capable. And I wish everybody good luck, and I will sign off. So have a great day, and good luck on the exam.